everybody, to the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. We are here today with the Nightly News President, Brian Christiana, and Nightly News Secretary, Parker Rose. This is Professor Paul Miller. We are here with you to run down our final episode of the season. Gentlemen, it's been a long fantasy season. It's hard to believe that the season is coming to a dramatic close. So, Brian, of course, I want to thank you for being here with us. Takeaways from this week. Let's talk about it.
Dallas won, finally. That's all I have to say.
And, of course, the big matchup this week in Philadelphia. Brian, are you planning on going to the game?
No, I already looked up how much nosebleeds were $270. So, I mean...
Interestingly enough, if you were an Eagle fan, you could have gotten into the game in Washington this weekend for $5.
Hey.
So, Parker, you and your team are coming off of a big loss on Sunday night, the Pittsburgh Steelers, but you are going to be going up to the game this weekend, a very important game against the Jets.
And I will say the next two games are very important, Professor Miller. If we would have beat the Bills, we could have been the highest wild card seat, but for the Steelers to make the playoffs, they have to win out. And I read an article this morning that Mike Tomlin is giving Duck Hodges the go for Sunday against the Jets.
All right, well, we will certainly come back. We will be back with you in January when we take the new term on. We're going to be giving out our fantasy awards, and we're going to talk a little bit about 2020 fantasy football. So this is our penultimate edition of the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. This week, because we are, for most of you, are in your finals, some of you might be in your semifinals, or some of you might be in 2-week finals. So I typically play in leagues where week 16 is it. But ESPN standard leagues do, especially 10-team leagues, do 2 weeks and 2 weeks. So for some, there might be 1 week. For some, there might be 2 weeks. So we're kind of going to figure that out. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over our top 20, maybe take a quick look at some of the wide receiver, running back, tight ends. We're going to take a quick look at the waiver wire and, of course, make our Super Bowl predictions. But one big segment that I want to talk about in just a little bit is a couple of fantasy busts. Of course, we are going to have this as an award in our Fantasy Football Awards show in January, but we are going to take a quick look about that. All right. From the top, gentlemen, let's take a look at our top 5 fantasy players, and then, of course, we'll expand from there, and I'm going to start with Parker. Parker, give me your top 5 overall fantasy players from this point on in the rest of the regular season.
So my top 5, I have Michael Thomas, Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, Zeke Elliott, and I'm going to put Mark Ingram.
Interesting. You know what? And Brian, I'll come to you in just a second. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about, and we actually talked about this off air while we were getting ready for the show. Michael Thomas, I have personally at number 3. Brian, I know you have Michael Thomas also at number 3. But you know what, Parker? I honestly would say, if in a redraft league, if I had the number 1 overall pick next year, I would think I have to take Michael Thomas, Drew Brees, Teddy Bridgewater, or fill in the blank at quarterback. This guy is just unbelievable. Let's talk a little bit about what is it that you like so much about Thomas?
Mike Thomas, no matter what defense he faces, he's going to make big plays, and he showed this fantasy season, like even the tough defenses, he put up points. And like what Brian and our friends we talk about, people argue that he's not the best wide receiver in the league right now, but I might have to back Brian up and say Michael Thomas is probably the best currently wide receiver in the league. People will argue DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre Hopkins was splitting more time with Will Fuller this year, so got to give it to Michael Thomas.
You know, and I think a knock on Thomas is that Breeze kind of makes Thomas, and I guess at a certain point, maybe that could have been valid, but I think what's interesting is even this season when Teddy Bridgewater was the quarterback for 5 games, Thomas still had the same types of numbers, so I think that's interesting. Definitely with you with McCaffrey, definitely with you with Jackson. I think right there you're looking at the top 4 picks right there, some order of McCaffrey, Jackson, Thomas, and Zeke Elliott. Brian, top 5.
Lamar Jackson, number 1. McCaffrey, 2nd. 3rd, Michael Thomas, as you said. I put Travis at number 4, Travis Kelce, and I put Kittle in at 5.
You know, I think what's interesting, too, about that, Brian, and that's something that we kind of talked about a little bit last episode, was that tight end is just so terrible that it's almost like you have to overcompensate for some of the better tight ends. So, you know, is someone like Kittle and Kelce, are they going to be top 5 picks? You know, I think after this season, I really think that I'm going to rethink my whole draft strategy.
You have to.
No longer is it going to be running back first. It is a necessity.
And the running back position was weak, man. There was nothing special about that either.
You know, when you're thinking about a guy like Saquon Barkley, which I do have number 4, but if you look at his numbers as a number 1 overall pick, you know, basically coming into this year, the number 1 overall picks were pretty consistently Zeke, Barkley, and Kamara.
Yeah.
None of those people, Zeke, yes. Barkley's been up and down, been hurt. Kamara, and we'll talk more about Kamara. What is going on with this guy? I mean, just he's consistent double digits, but you didn't draft Kamara
To get you 11, 12 points a week.
You're looking
exactly.
at 20, 25 points.
All right, I have McCaffrey 1, Lamar Jackson 2, Michael Thomas number 3, Zeke number 4, DeAndre Hopkins number 5, and I do love Hopkins. I think Hopkins has some staying power. I think the issue with Hopkins is, and Parker, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, is Will Fuller, is Kenny Stills. I mean, they are stacked at wide receiver, and often, of course, Hopkins is going to get double teamed, but I still believe in Hopkins, especially in a PPR league. I think Hopkins is the way to go. All right, let's look at the back half of our top 10. Parker?
6, I have Kelsey. 7, I have Kittle. 8, I have Patrick Mahomes. 9, I have Stephon Diggs. And 10, I had a hard time debating between Austin Eckler or Devontae Parker.
And I think what's going to be interesting here is what is going to happen with the Chargers backfield next year. What's going to happen with the Chargers in general? Phillip Rivers is a free agent. Melvin Gordon, free agent. You know, I'm not sure what Eckler's contract situation is, but that whole team could really change. And I think I'm probably not as high on Eckler as I probably should be. I'm just not, they're so up and down on a weekly basis. It's pretty incredible.
Well, I'll give Eckler credit for how bad they are. He still puts up points, though, for them. Like, I have him as my flex, and he put up a lot of points for me every week I had him.
500 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, 78 catches, 892 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I mean, he's got wide receiver numbers, plus he runs the ball. You know, it's hard not to be high on Austin Eckler. Brian, back half of your top 10.
All right, so 6, I put Patrick Mahomes. 7, I put Zeke. 8, I put Derrick Henry from Tennessee Titans. 9, DeAndre Hopkins. And then I put Chris Carson from the Seattle Seahawks at number 10.
My only concern in the future, I'm talking 2020 and beyond about Carson, is Rashad Penny, although news came out on Rashad Penny that he not only tore his ACL, but he may have had other injuries in his knee, and right now they're not even for sure that he's going to be back for training camp. Penny really cut into Carson's workload, and that's what worried me earlier in the season. At this point, though, he's getting all of the carries. There were several occasions when both of them actually were, potential starts. In fact, there was a week in one of my leagues that I started both Penny and Carson, and they both did very well. The problem is that you don't really know what you're getting with Seattle. Some weeks they have, some weeks it's sort of a Russell Wilson week, some weeks it's a Chris Carson week, some weeks it's a Rashad Penny week. So Chris Carson, the one thing about him, only 3 games this entire year in single digits. The last in week 12, but the last 4 weeks, 26, 12, 17, 9, 19, 13. I mean, he is catching the ball out of the backfield. He's getting the carries. He's averaging right around 20 carries a week, and 20 to 25 touches from a running back in a high-powered offense. That's something that I think pretty much anybody would sign up for. For me, in the back half of my top 10, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Derrick Henry at 8, Tyreek Hill, and Saquon Barkley. I think Barkley's big week this week helped, but to be honest, gentlemen, I want to get your insight on Barkley, because again, he's gonna be a top 5 projected pick next year. He's certainly played well when he's played, but he's injury prone, plays on a poor offense, and is Daniel Jones going to make the next step next year?
It's a really good question. Saquon Barkley, great talent, suffered that injury beginning of the, and again, he was supposed to be out multiple weeks, and I think only missed like 2-3 weeks. So
He missed 3 weeks.
yeah, an incredible player. next step for him is, again, just staying healthy and going back to like that rookie season he had. The offensive line really needs to step up for them. So until the Giants show that they're committed to fixing that offense, I don't know. I mean, I think we could just see it like this season. I think we could start seeing like this season until the Giants make that next step.
Only 4.1 yards a carry. Only 5 total touchdowns this year. Only 45 catches and just over 1,000 scrimmage yards, which for basically anyone else, you'd probably be fine with that, right? You'd sign up for that for a lot of other backs in the league. James Conner, for example, that'd be a good starting point for him, but not someone who you pick number 1 overall. I do have Barkley there because I'm ranking here rest of the season, and I do think Barkley has an opportunity at Washington this week to put up some serious numbers. If you're playing daily fantasy, I would pay the money for Barkley, and of course, they'll end the season with Philly, which does have a decent run defense, but you watched Adrian Peterson have a heck of a day against Philly last week. All right, let's talk about back half of your top 20, but let's just look at specific players that either fell quite a bit or people who you want to make sure that we talk about. Parker?
Well, you guys already talked on, but Derrick Henry's on my back. Derrick Henry, he was under the radar in the start of the game, at start of the season, but when that change of quarterback, it seems like he just exploded. I had him on my bench the whole time, and then once when he started exploding, he nonstop points every week.
Well, I mean, before this last week where he only had 8.6, listen to the 5 previous weeks. 25, 33, 28, 23, 23. I mean, you're talking about over that 5-game stretch, he had 8 touchdowns over that 5-game stretch. And not only that, this season he's got 13 touchdowns on the ground, another 2 through the air. You know, why I can honestly say I've never had Derrick Henry on a team. Why I've never had him on a team is because most leagues I play in are PPR, and he just does not catch the ball out of the backfield. Only on 2 occasions has he even had more than 2 catches. But if you're going to put up those kind of numbers and that number of touchdowns, I mean, I think we're going to see Derrick Henry clearly be a first-round pick next year. I don't think there's any question about that. Your thoughts on Derrick Henry? We're both have him around 8.
Yeah, he's. I have him in the league that we're in, and a great solid player to have. You can use him as flat running back, depending. I mean, how you switch your lineup, but great player to have on your team. I've had him the past 2 seasons.
Who else in your top 20 did you want to highlight?
Tannehill.
That's actually, I mean, I guess it's surprising when you think about it.
Yeah, because you think of Miami Dolphins, Ryan Tannehill.
Yes.
He was still a top 10 pick, and his numbers this season, he's averaging 18 points a game, which is really good, but his last 5 games, 19, 32, 14, 27, 24, and on a rather anemic offense.
A.J. Brown, he's picking who to throw the ball to, and it's going well.
Brown has definitely broken out. I look for him to be, but what is going on with Tannehill? Where was this in Miami?
That's
Miami
a great question.
just was a bad team.
I'm sure they
Miami
wanted
at
to
the time
know.
when Tannehill was a starting quarterback, Jarvis Landry was there, Kenny Stills. Who knows, man? That's why they say personnel is a real big thing. Coaching is huge, and
something interesting about Tannehill in just the 9 games. How about 4 rushing touchdowns? Only 6 picks. I mean, he is excelling in. I think
Good for him.
He's managing the game. And again, if you're Tennessee, you franchise this guy.
Yeah, he'll be on the team that season.
So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Tannehill going forward. One guy that I wanted to definitely mention that I don't know that's necessarily got the amount of fanfare. And to be perfectly honest with you, gentlemen, I didn't even really realize this until I was going through this morning preparing. I've got Nick Chubb at 17, and overall I've got him at running back 8. And I suppose that's kind of where he was drafted, but on basically, I think it's fair to say one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL, Chubb has still managed to put up serious points this year. 6 games over 100 yards, averaging 5.2 yards a carry. Does, even with Kareem Hunt, still catching the ball out of the backfield. You know, Chubb is going to be, I believe I'm going to have him quite a bit on a lot of teams next year, so he's definitely somebody I wanted to mention. Last person that I want to mention, Alvin Kamara, basically, who in the preseason I think was on almost everybody's top 3 players overall, now for me barely cracks my top 20. I mean, what's happened to this guy?
Teams have adjusted to him. That's one thing. I mean, this is what's going to happen. I've been saying this to everyone. It's going to happen to Lamar Jackson. I don't know if it'll happen to Patrick Mahomes, but teams are going to adjust their defenses to where they neutralize these guys. And I mean, Kamara, when they try to run with him, it just doesn't work. Latavius Murray runs, and it works.
I mean, he's average. See, there's the thing, Brian, is he's still averaging 4.5 yards a carry. He's still getting double-digit carries. There's only one game this season against Atlanta that he didn't have double-digit carries, and that's not even counting his receptions. He's got 73 catches. The problem was if you watch him, I don't know how much of the game you guys watched last night. In the past, they'd line him up outside. They'd line him up, and he'd actually run routes. He'd run little wheel routes. But if you watch him, and if not, watch him in future games, unless they change this, because they should. All he's doing is just running. So if he's lined up in the backfield, he's just running straight out. He's not even running past the line of scrimmage, and all these passes are just to bail out Breeze, whereas he's just not involved in the offense. You got to put him in your top 20 just on the sheer volume, because he's literally getting 17 to 20 touches in a very explosive offense, and especially in a PPR league, he's still going to have value. But gosh, he has not scored since week 3. In fact, he only has 2 touchdowns on the season, both coming against Seattle in week 3 when he had 37. Since then, only one 20-point game. That's back against Tampa Bay when he had 10 catches. And of course, we are talking PPR. This is just mind-boggling to me. I have Kamara in several leagues, and I don't know how to value him for next year. I would guess he'd be a top 20 play, but you're really rolling the dice there.
I remember you actually traded from Professor Miller, and he did not help you at all.
No, and the people I traded back to you there didn't. I mean, I traded you Cook. Basically, for Kamara, I traded Cook, Hunter Henry, and Damian Williams. So 2 of the 3 haven't really done much, and Cook is out. So the trade was kind of a wash for us. But
that's risk you take, though, in fantasy. You can't predict what happens in the future.
We definitely talked about a lot of the running backs here. I think we mentioned most of our top 10 backs here. Before we move on, is there anybody in the bottom half of your top 10 that you guys want to talk about that maybe we didn't have a chance to?
I mean, I don't think we really need to talk about him, but I put Aaron Jones in there as well from Green Bay.
Boy, he's another guy that if you picked him, there's a pretty darn good chance you made the playoffs, because even though yardage-wise he hasn't done much, he's got 17 touchdowns. Games of 4 touchdowns against Dallas, 3 touchdowns against Carolina, 2 touchdowns this last week against Chicago. So even when he only had 51 rushing yards and averaged 3.9 a carry, still 2 touchdowns. Also does catch the ball out of the backfield. Here's some of his reception totals: 6, 7, 7, and 6. That's 4 different occasions where he's getting you an extra 10 points. I look for Aaron Jones, who is actually ranked number 4. I don't know why I've got so much hate for Aaron Jones. I don't even have him in my top 10 running backs. Overall, 4th in running back yardage. So I'm interesting to see where Jones goes next year. And Parker, anybody you want to mention the back half of your running backs we didn't chat about?
Yeah, this guy had a bust season for a while, but the last couple of weeks, especially for playoffs, he came in clutch. I'm gonna give Joe Mixon some credit. Joe Mixon showed up during the playoff weeks. He did put up some points, and for an offense that the Bengals don't have at the line, he's carrying his load.
Basically prior to the bye week, he had 1 game over 70 yards. Wasn't really involved in the passing game, but since the bye, 114, 86, 79, 44, 146, and 136. Pretty impressive there, especially against a New England defense that's notorious for being so great. But unfortunately, I would imagine a lot of people probably dumped Joe Mixon earlier in the season. And he is rostered 97% of leagues. But man, that 10 carry for 2-yard outing against Jacksonville, and after the 8 carries for 10 yards against Baltimore, you might have wanted to get off the Mixon train. But again, such a bad team. Interesting to see what they do with Andy Dalton.
Joe Burrow is coming to Cincinnati,
and he's not happy with it based off when he's
an Ohio guy.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure he wants to play there.
Yeah, he's from Ohio. He wants to go there.
The one picture with Boomer Esiason give him the helmet, he didn't look too happy.
Well, I mean, he's not allowed to do that on public screening. That's a media thing you have to worry about.
All right, well, we're going to move right along to the wide receivers. Again, we already talked about probably some of the top half, and I'm sure in some order, our top 5 is at least includes Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, Julio Jones, I'm sure, up there for most of us. Other than those 4, who are some people that you've got high on your wide receiver rankings?
I put DJ Moore on there from Carolina.
Brian, I've talked to a few people about Moore. He has got to be one of the surprises in the NFL this year.
Yeah.
86 catches, 1,174 yards, only 4 touchdowns, but 133 targets. I mean, this guy has had double-digit games. He's only had 2 non-double-digit games, and basically since Week 9, 17, 21, 17, 31, 19, 12, and 20. I mean, this guy seems to be the real deal.
Yeah.
I think my concern here is just the shuffling at quarterback.
Yeah, Carolina is weak.
Newton, and then to Allen, and then I hear that they're starting Will Greer from West Virginia. I'm surprised you're not familiar with him, Brian. He was huge at West Virginia. Will Greer?
I'm going to be honest. I didn't watch college. I've honestly slacked off the past couple seasons.
I think that Greer actually could be a starter in the league.
That's great.
I'm going to be very interested to see. And again, if you're a rookie starting at quarterback, you're obviously going to try to find your number 1 wide receiver and your number 1 running back the ball. DJ Moore, I actually have him at 7. Where'd you have him, Brian?
I had DJ Moore at 7.
And Parker, did DJ Moore make your top 10?
He did not.
Well, I'm sure he's right there, outside.
He is.
Who are some of the people you have in your top 10 that you want to talk about?
Tyler Lockett.
It's funny. I actually had one of my friends they were in a semifinal, and they asked me about Lockett. My biggest concern was these 4 weeks in a row here, 6, 5, 0, and 8. Of course, the big game this week, 8 for 120 and a touchdown for 26 points. Boy, the Seahawks really looked, when Penny and Carson were going, they weren't throwing the ball at all. Lockett was not getting involved. They had Gordon, they had Metcalf. I think now that, of course, Gordon is suspended indefinitely, I think Lockett's a pretty safe play going forward. And certainly if any of you out there have Lockett, you have to play him this week. Arizona, one of the worst passing defenses in the league. Of course, Week 17, San Francisco, so you don't necessarily like that. But it is at home, and Russell Wilson and the Seahawks are going to need that game. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But definitely this week, Tyler Lockett, if you have him, you got to play him. I actually have him at number 8. Where'd you have him, Parker?
I had him at 10, and then I had Devontae Parker right above him.
And you know what? There's another guy. Not only did he play through a concussion, he had to pass the concussion protocol. They re-signed him to a 4-year, $40 million contract. So, but again, where does Miami go? Do they take a shot on a guy like Tua and hope he comes out? Do you roll with Fitzpatrick for another year?
I'm going with Rosen. I'm giving Rosen the chance.
I'm staying with Fitzpatrick.
No, Rosen's awful. I think Rosen's time in the NFL's done. I think if they would have seen anything from him at all, Brian, he'd be in there. The season's a lost one. They gave him a chance, and he just did nothing.
I think Fitzpatrick's playing decent in Miami.
It's not the offense.
He's playing fine because like I said, him and Devontae Parker are connecting crazy. It's that defense that.
Well, that's where he does well with number 1 receivers, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Him and Mike Evans were very good together. That was that last season he was there. But because when Fitzpatrick played, Evans did good. When Jameis played, Godwin did good.
Yep.
So
one thing that I would say is if they were to go for a guy like Tua. And so Tua might be out part of next season. Why not just keep Fitzpatrick around? He's a veteran. He can help mentor the guy. But is he? I mean, this guy, it's like he drinks out of the fountain of youth. He's been in this league for 16 years, and he still has got the grit. He's got the arm. They won some games.
What I don't understand is how this guy doesn't have concussion because he has that big of a beard that his chin strap don't even fit underneath his helmet.
I swear, he's funny to watch, I got to tell you.
He makes some weird faces when he scores touchdowns, but he's definitely, for an Ivy League quarterback, he's definitely not bad.
I gotta tell you. So one other person that I wanted to bring up is Kenny Galladay. Galladay, speaking of somebody who has had to put up with a lot of different quarterbacks, this guy has had to deal with a lot of quarterbacks, but 56 catches for 1,052 yards, 10 touchdowns. Again, only 3-4 games this season that he wasn't in double digits, and I gotta tell you, he has really taken a major step up, and to be a top 10 wide receiver, I mean, I have him at 6. I'm like,
I had him at the same also.
He's a guy that I had in some leagues that either I'm going to keep or I'm going to do everything I can to go get next year.
Marvin had a decent season too, so again, the receiving core there is very strong. Mm-hmm. Tight end position is going to be something that Hawkinson, decent. But, I mean, that whole offense, the running back situation is going to be really big for the Detroit Lions.
Well, Kerryon Johnson's been out for much of the year, and he was looking great in the time when he was in there as the feature back. But you want to talk about a team that's just been decimated by injuries.
Matthew Stafford.
Every one of their notable players is out for the year. And I'm even hearing people talking about maybe firing Matt Patricia. How's that even fair?
Matt Patricia, I think he's one of the better people you want in the league. Matt Patricia, I just enjoy watching the guy do his job. He's funny, yeah.
Why are people going to want to fire a first-year coach?
Second year.
Oh, he is in the second year?
Yeah, definitely.
This is his second
Might
season.
even be his third.
It's second.
Okay.
He hasn't. This isn't his first season.
Because that's like firing the Miami Dolphins head coach. Because
Oh, no.
Flores. He's there for the future.
Yeah, he's definitely going to be there. Shermer, I think, is one that's not going to make it in New York.
There's a lot more coaches in the league that need to be fired than Matt Patricia.
I'll raise my hand to that. And definitely.
All right, let's take a look at tight end. Again, I don't want to assume, gentlemen, but I'm imagining our top 3 are probably the similar top 3 that we've had all season. In some order of Kelsey, Kittle, and Ertz.
Yep.
Even though Ertz, my gosh, has dropped a touchdown pass each of the last 3 weeks from Carson Wentz. I mean, the Eagles are struggling enough with having such poor wide receiving options.
Yep.
And I think a bigger problem is, and maybe a reason why you might want to look at Ertz more next year, is because how do you solve this problem? Jeffrey is done. Deshaun Jackson's done. You got a second rounder Arcega-Whiteside who barely can get on the field. Yes, you have Goddard, but what are they going to do? Even if you draft a guy in the first round, even a guy like Hollywood Brown, who was one of the first overall picks wide receiver wise, has had a good year and he's helped them, but they need so much help. And where are they going to get it? It's not like Amari Cooper is going to be a free agent. It's not like some of these other people, these top wide receivers are going to be free agents. There's just not that many of them. So I would consider that. So let's look a little deeper at tight end. Who are some tight ends that you think really, really surprised this year?
At the end, I put Higbee on there from the Rams.
He's a guy that I'm actually really surprised by. He kind of came out of nowhere. He was their backup tight end before Everett went out and came back, and then went out again and came back. And so Higbee, came off 13 catches last week.
So in all reality, if you think about it, Higbee could end up being... He can be the third option all the way down to the fifth option if you want to think about it. Because and he's on my bus list, but Brandon Cooks had a terrible season.
Yes, he did.
Absolutely terrible season. And then he's the number 4 receiver they have, Josh Reynolds.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
So, I mean, again, I don't know what is going on with Cooks.
Yeah,
I was reading an article today that somebody speculated that maybe the concussions have caught up to him somehow. I don't know, and nor do I want to speculate. I'm not that type of person.
Maybe it's just time to move on from him.
But you got to look at Higbee. First of all, if he's available in your league, go get him. He's only rostered in 39% of leagues. Last 3 weeks, 23, 18, 23, 1 touchdown, 14 targets this week.
Hey, I mean, we were saying that the tight end position's a real tough one. This is a guy that you could really see. Noah Fant, too. Again, we talked about him.
Love Noah Fant.
There's some good guys that you could can really be used. I mean, Noah Fant, he got hurt in the game against Kansas.
From what I understand, still early in the week, he should be okay. But again, they're out of it. 2 weeks left. You never know. Maybe he doesn't get as much. Anyone you want to talk about, Parker?
I have Darren Waller from the Raiders.
Waller, I really like. They're kind of in the same type of position where they don't really have much.
He's a great tight end down when you're in the red zone. He gets those red zone catches.
Here's the problem with Waller. Only 3 scores on the season, but does have 80 and did eclipse the 1,000-yard mark after last week with 2 more weeks. I think he's probably going to be in that 4 to 5 range next year for tight ends. Very nice to see. Very consistent. Definitely for example, the last 5 weeks, targets 7, 6, 9, 6, and 10. You like seeing that from your tight ends. Well, one guy I wanted to take a look at, Mark Andrews. Again, this is not, I'm not throwing it out there, but again, he has been extremely consistent. Definitely scoring 8 touchdowns, 89 targets. It doesn't quite have the numbers, catches and receiving yards as Waller, but more touchdowns, better offense. I like Andrews next year, even though he's one of 3 tight ends there. Again, I think tight end, I think this is a situation where you have the top 3 and then everyone else falls off a cliff. And I got to tell you, with the issues that I had at tight end this year, I am 100% picking a tight end early, and I don't really even care how my running backs are.
Travis was always my second overall pick in all my leagues, so
I think that's very smart. All right, well, we are heading into our final 2 segments here. The first segment that I want to take a look at is our busts. Guys, I know that we are going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in the awards show, but let's talk about one specific player that you think is the top bust of the year, Parker.
OBJ.
And so
I'm not going to blame him for it. I just think that Baker Mayfield likes Landry a lot better.
The interesting thing about Beckham is he's still got 910 yards, only 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's the first issue. So, and he's played, he's been healthy, but he's getting the targets, double-digit targets in 6 games. He's just not been able to put it together. You could say the same thing about Kamara, though. When you look at just Kamara's numbers, receptions and yards, it looks good. But again, Kamara, 2 touchdowns. Beckham, 2 touchdowns. Fantasy, we need you to get into the end zone. So again, those were actually the 2 that I had, Beckham and Kamara. Brian?
David Johnson.
I think someday we are going to find out what happened here. And yes, he was playing through an injury. He missed 2 games, but gosh, I mean, since honestly, all the way back to week 7, he's had a combined 16 carries. 16 carries in the last 6 games. That's unbelievable. I don't really even know what to say. I mean, they had him returning kicks this week. They've got to be able to trade him, and he's got to be able to go somewhere else. David Johnson, again, injury aside, I would imagine he's probably...
Because he was last couple seasons, he was a running back he was a top 5 pick. He was a top 5 running back pick.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what happened, and he seems like he's a pretty stand-up guy. Nothing's come out that there have been issues, but David Johnson, I mean, I would say that spoiler alert, but I would say there's a pretty good chance that he wins the award for biggest non-injury bust of the season.
Hey, one of the leaders I made the playoffs, and he was my first-round pick, so imagine if I could have taken Zeke over him, because that was when Zeke, you were worried about the suspension, or not the suspension, but holding out. If I would have had Zeke, man.
A couple of just quick waiver wire pickups. Obviously, playoffs this week. One person I wanted to say, Anthony Miller from the Bears. If you're looking to replace a Chris Godwin or a Mike Evans that you've lost in the past couple of weeks, I'd say look no further than Anthony Miller. Only rostered in 25% of leagues, but his last 3 weeks, 140 yards, 42 and a touchdown, and 118 and a touchdown, and has had double-digit fantasy points the last 5 weeks, 11, 13, 23, 13, and 26. Trubisky's look better. Of course, it's not going to be as good as a Godwin or an Evans or maybe some people in some other places that have disappointed this season. Amari Cooper comes to mind, has been very poor the last month of the season, though I would say that the Eagles' secondary is poor, so you might run Cooper out there. Anthony Miller, somebody to consider. Parker, do you have a waiver wire?
Well, since Godwin and Evans are out, go for Brashad Perriman. He put up numbers last week. Jameis Winston was giving him the ball.
What's interesting about Perriman is, for those of you who don't know, former number 1 pick in Baltimore, just didn't pan out. They gave him every opportunity to make it work, but just didn't pan out. But again, Perriman with double digits, 13, 16, and 34 the last 3 weeks. And again, with Godwin going out, he's out for the season. They haven't necessarily come out and said it, but initially it was, he's done. Because usually a hamstring injury takes about 4 weeks to heal, and with the Bucs being out of it. So no Evans, no Godwin. So you got Perriman and O.J. Howard, basically. And Winston's still chucking the ball. I mean, I would say Perriman's got to be the number one. And again, he's only rostered in 9% of leagues. So, again, there's somebody really good. Brian, any thoughts on waiver wire?
I mean, if you guys want me to be a little biased, I could say go get Tony Pollard, maybe. I don't know.
Wow. I mean, what a game he had. And to be honest, what was the deal? Zeke is... I mean, he's getting a lot of touches, but Pollard, 12 for 131, 2 catches out of the backfield. He's getting an opportunity. Even earlier in the season, he had a 100-yard game against Miami. And so if you really feel like rolling the dice here...
I mean, yeah, it's a real... Who knows, man? I don't know. The Eagles' D-line, because Tony Pollard's not a north-south running back. He's an east-west, the opposite of Zeke. So, I mean...
I got to tell you, though, I was very impressed with him, and he, again, only rostered in 10% of leagues. So if you're in a situation where you have no choice, but you have to pick up somebody and roll the dice with, I guess you could do worse than Pollard.
It was tough picking a waiver wire one.
Or Cole Beasley.
Beasley, I think, has got a shot. Danny Amendola, I think, might be worth it in a PPR league. I'm going to give you a super deep one here. Mike Boone from the Minnesota Vikings last week, 13 carries, 56 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's because Dalvin Cook out and Alexander Madison also injured. So Boone could be the starter there. And remember, that game's on Monday night. So if you have Madison and Boone, you're going to have whoever starts. Before we get out of here, of course, we're going to end strong. Parker, let's talk about your Super Bowl predictions.
From the beginning of the year, it was a big, big bust. I had the Eagles and the Chargers. Looks like both teams are not even probably going to make the playoffs. The Eagles need to win out. That means they got to beat Dallas.
Chargers got eliminated. Did you say Chargers, Parker?
Yes.
Yeah, Chargers got eliminated this past week.
So that is, I feel like the Super Bowl is going to be down to the Baltimore Ravens and the Saints, and I think Breeze is going to win that Super Bowl and get a second ring.
I love it. All right, Brian, Super Bowl selections. Let's hear them.
I put New England and Kansas City, Miller. I thought that one would make the most sense out of all of. I mean, the only possible other situation I could think of is maybe Green Bay going in there, but I think Kansas City's going to represent the AFC.
Now, the last time we had you on, you talked about how much you basically hated Baltimore.
I still do.
How I respect your point of view, but the games that they have won since our last podcast, how can you not be sold on Baltimore?
I seriously think that this team is one person away from being a non-playoff. Not even being in the playoffs. This team, if that one player goes down, guess what? That team is not going to be in the playoffs. And the way that guy plays is that he is going to be a target. He is going to be out when he does his rollouts or just running. He is a target, and that is the problem with Cam Newton, is that when he goes out there on the field, he is going to get hit. And I think that Lamar Jackson's going to be, how can a referee really determine the whole running back and court? No, it's just not going to happen.
So by that rationale, though, the same could be said for a lot of teams. I mean, Patrick Mahomes does not to say that he runs to the same amount or quality as Lamar Jackson, but Patrick Mahomes, if he goes out, yes, Matt Moore came in and was serviceable.
If Patrick Mahomes isn't on the Kansas City Chiefs, they are not going to the Super Bowl.
So you're making you're arguing against yourself. Yes, Lamar Jackson, if he's out, yes, the Ravens are done. They have no chance. And I don't disagree with that. But by that rationale, almost every playoff team, if they lost their quarterback, they're probably not going to be a good team. So the question is, do you really think that if he is able to be and stay in the lineup, do you think that the Patriots can beat them after they've already lost to them?
Do I think New England can beat Baltimore? Yes. I think New England in the playoffs, there's something magical there. I don't know what it is, but it's something different.
Why the hate against Baltimore? I'm just curious.
I just don't like it, Miller. I don't understand it. I mean, this is Michael Vick 2.0. I mean,
Oh, boy.
Vic is better than Lamar Jackson is.
That's difficult to say considering Lamar Jackson only played a season and a half and we got to see Michael Vick's entire career.
I think, again, NFL defenses will adjust.
Interesting. But, you know, they've been doing this for a year and a half now, and no one's really been able to stop them. So
Chargers did.
That was one game last year. And you're exactly right. You're
Kansas
exactly
City
right.
did.
You're exactly right. You're about the only person that I've talked to that really just cannot stand what they're doing. And I'm just curious to hear why. So, all right, well, we shall see. Recap. You're going with who?
I've officially put New Orleans versus Kansas City.
And the winner?
New Orleans.
So we've got two New Orleans here. Interesting.
I would honestly be cool with either one in that situation. I love Kelsey. I love Michael Thomas. I think I'd be happy no matter what with that one.
My NFC, I have New Orleans and Seattle. My AFC, I have Baltimore and Kansas City. I'm going to take New Orleans and Baltimore. And I'm actually, last podcast I did say Baltimore, but I'm going to go with New Orleans here. I think there's something going on with Drew Brees. I really think that this could be the season. And hopefully Brees wins. And not that I want to see him leave the league, but hey, why not go out on a high note?
Go out on a high note, yeah.
And I think Brees would be the kind of player that would go out on a high note.
I hope so. I mean, I think Peyton did it. Why not? I mean, Tom obviously won't, but...
Well, everybody, that is our final edition for 2019 of the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. Again, we will be back in January with another edition, which we will give out our fantasy awards, and we will take a look at the all too early rankings, top 25 rankings for 2020, again, without a whole lot of information before we take our off-season break. Brian, I got to tell you, it's been an incredible fantasy season. You've got a really good shot to win our league.
I'm in the finals in our league. Yeah.
I did not make the playoffs, even though I had like the most points of anyone in the league, which is a little salty, but that happens sometimes. Parker didn't do quite as well.
Oh God!
But and I don't. Did Tyler make the playoffs?
No, Tyler didn't make it either.
So there you go. 3 of your 4 fantasy analysts on this show didn't even make the playoffs in our own league. So
yeah.
Go figure. But that doesn't mean any of the things that we say aren't valuable. But to be honest with you, you can't win them all. Fantasy is a tough game. I did make the playoffs in 2 of my 3 big leagues. And unfortunately, I lost in the semifinals. Yeah. Thanks to Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston, who are not on my team.
What a guy.
So more power to him. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for our December episode of the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. We'll see you back here again after the holidays in January, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.